This is Emily Dickinson, American poet, unknown in her lifetime in the 1800s. And many of you have maybe never seen her before, but even more of you have never seen me before. As she says in one of her poems, "I'm nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too?" I know many of us have felt like nobodies before. I know I have, and especially when programming. And what is something we could do about that nobody feeling? I think it's read. Next up, you'll see, this is William Carlos Williams. He was a poet. He was also a doctor, chief of pediatrics at a hospital. I think what he said about poetry should probably preface all the poems you ever read, ever, anywhere. He said that it is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And, ooh, I know, thank you. But what's found there? I think what's found there is sort of answers to that nobody question that Emily Dickinson was asking. James Baldwin, a novelist, essayist, a playwright, poet, social critic, like everything, basically, subject of the recent documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, is fantastic. What he said about reading, I think, should probably preface all the reading you ever do, ever, anywhere. He said that you think your pain and heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. Pretty much. But what do you read? But really, as programmers, there's something we read every day, all day. Some of you I know would get that. Okay, so, but really there, each question and answer is like a tale of pain and heartbreak. Really, when you're facing programming problems, right? So, but what's a way to think about how to face those programming problems? Me, like honestly, I've turned to John Keats sometimes. He's talked about, you're laughing now. He's talked about negative capability, and it's not negative the way that we think of it. It's more negative in terms of the absence of capability. He says that negative capability is that when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. I think this is like a prerequisite for successful learning, and it's sort of a prerequisite for when you're going through documentation and you encounter something like this. What the hell? I mean, I'm still sort of fascinated by the Miami Vice bright pastels on the shapes. I don't get it. But like documentation like this is crazy, right? I mean, we deal with it all the time. And about documentation, my favorite quote, there's a Borges short story where in it the Cartography Guild struck a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire. It's a map the size of the thing it's mapping. That's what documentation feels like sometimes when you're reading it or writing it, you know. Am I right? I mean, come on. But you've mastered that documentation. Look on my code, ye mighty, and despair. You know, sign, dear test team. But you know that awesome code that you write, well, if you've read the poem, Ozymandias, then you know also that beside these words, nothing remains, really, in that poem. So that's where it's destined in some ways. But what can you do about that sort of sense of loss about that awesome programming that you did? I mean, because we all have to deal with it at some point. For that, I think we have the poet Elizabeth Bishop. In her poem, One Art, she says the refrain in that is, the art of losing isn't hard to master. But notice there, she's saying that losing is an art and it's something you can master, but exactly how do you master it, really? She says you lose something every day, and it's like the imperative. Like she says, the hour badly spent. So maybe that hour that you spent badly, maybe reading documentation or something, could actually be something good, in the end. But think about it, can you really just with thinking turn something from bad to good? That comes up in Hamlet, actually, Shakespeare. You may have heard of that, nobody. So in Hamlet, he's talking to two friends of his that are visiting from college. You may know the names of those two dudes. He's talking to them, and he says, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." Really, the goodness or badness can drive from how you think of it, but it's not that simple. He's saying this to two dudes he's sending off to die. So sometimes death, bad is just bad, right? So then you have my favorite Shakespeare quote of all time that you may not know, never, 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 never. This is King Lear grieving over his dead daughter, Cordelia, and this is also me grieving over the time I spent trying to figure out the group by operator with observables. Anyhow, but now I want to end with the words of David Foster Wallace, some words from his unfinished novel, The Pale King. In that, one of the characters says that true heroism is you alone in a designated workspace. And I hope, thank you. I hope now that with at least It's his words, not mine. Hope now, like with at least some of the words of these nobodies with you, you'll feel less alone in your designated workspace. Thank you.